Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'll be reading Fan Pai by Guāng, The Villain's White Halo by Hao Dayi Zhen Wei Sheng Zhi, chapters 14 through 17. As always, please remember that this novel is rated mature by the publisher, so check the description for a link to the content warnings. Chapter 14. Yin Biyue's heavy heart did not last. Should it bring this dragon scale armored robe, and this South Sea mountain submerging dagger, and the purple bamboo bone jade fan, the cover for the 9 dragon divine bell, and the realm's cauldron? Take them all. While Liu Qishuang pondered what else might be missing, the corner of Yin Biyue's mouth wavered as he stared at the small mountain of spiritual weapons. He hadn't been able to get a word in since he arrived. Liu Qishuang practiced the art of the fist and disregarded material possessions in her training. The majority of these weapons had been the spoils from the Battle of Shiying Mountains. If that was the case, he couldn't possibly accept them. Clearing his throat softly, he interrupted her. Shijie, I understand your goodwill, but I am a sword cultivator. Would I not be neglecting my fundamentals if I traveled with so many spiritual weapons? Liu Qishuang thought that made sense. She didn't usually use these things herself. Still, she was worried. Should he at least bring one for self-protection? In the end, the two came to a compromise, and Yin Biyue took a dagger. After calming down, Liu Qishuang felt like she'd been possessed. A journey was filled with unpredictable dangers. How could any preparation be perfect? How could any contingencies be foolproof? Her overthinking could end up harming her Shudi instead. The road ahead might look long and unpredictable, but Shudi had to be the one to walk it alone. Liu Qishuang relaxed, offered him some words of encouragement, and let him go. Luo Mingchen sat upright and poised at a desk, reading. His gaze was quiet and profound, like the immeasurable depths of the ocean. It wasn't a scroll of jade slips he was perusing, but an old book with yellowed corners. Even though it was no precious tome, he remained diligent. His self-discipline and sense of responsibility was rooted in his character, down to his bones. Even when he was alone, his comportment was immaculate. Sometimes, even Jinyangzi found it a little much. However, his manners were not snobbish. On the contrary, anyone who came in contact with him felt at ease. Interacting with him was as comfortable as an evening breeze. His smile carried the right amount of warmth without being overly broad or faint. No matter whom he was speaking with, or what about, he always maintained a respectful distance, neither too close nor too far. His house was like his person, neither too extravagant nor too simple. His furnishings were conventionally arranged. The osmanthus ice incense burning inside his lotus-patterned nephrite incense burner induced mental clarity and a contemplative, tranquil mind. The sweet, refreshing fragrance swirled in the room, and faint trails of smoke lingered upon Luo Mingchen's brow. He sat at the desk like a towering, rugged pine that stood steadfast at the edge of a harrowing cliff. Only he knew his outward calm was a facade. The incense had been a gift from an old friend of the Qianglu sword sect who once visited Zangya. He had never used it before. There had been no need. Yet when the heart was agitated, how could mere osmanthus ice incense steady it? Thus, when someone stirred the barrier cast at his front gates, he set his book down and went outside. The visitor was He Yin. Unlike her usual bubbly self, her face was lined with concern. Luo Mingchen welcomed her into his courtyard, but not inside. Although cultivators did not emphasize the gap between men and women, he had always adhered to propriety. He Yin spoke up the moment she took a seat at the stone bench beneath the tree. Shixiang, are you really not coming with us? I will be going with Ying Shidi and Duan Shidi of Xihua Peak. Their chosen route is different. It diverges a bit and requires us to depart a month in advance. Luo Mingchen replied. Sheng Shishu of Xiping Peak will be leading the team for this year's flower plucking tournament. Listen to his arrangements. The registration for the flower plucking tournament was voluntary without any restriction on the number of registrants. Only 30 disciples from Sangya were participating because there weren't many in the spirit concentration and breakthrough stages. Furthermore, not everyone at Sangya was eager for fame. There were others whose states weren't yet solidified and who preferred to continue their training in seclusion, knowing they were unlikely to pluck the lotus this time around. Nonetheless, compared to the sects of less renown that couldn't even gather 20 disciples in the breakthrough state, Zhang Ya's number was a terrifying prospect. He Yin wasn't surprised by Luo Mingchen's answer, as she had learned of his decision prior to coming. She twisted her sleeves but plucked up her courage and asked the question on her mind despite her anxiety. Shēng, did you really do something wrong to Yin Shēng? In her experience, Luo Shēng was never wrong. If he seemed to have made a mistake, it was someone else's fault. This was a blind belief akin to faith. This was why, though she knew Luo Mingchen never lied, and had felt bad for Yin Biyue during the public trial, she asked the question again now, still hopeful. Luo Mingchen fell silent. The wind swept around his expansive sleeves, surrounding him with autumn's chill. It was a long time before he finally said, "I have wronged him." He Yin's eyes watered. She bit her lip, unable to find her voice. Then, without even a salute, she leaped to her feet and ran out of the courtyard. She ran all the way to Xiqian Peak's lucent lake, so filled with despair that she couldn't breathe. However, when she saw her sorry face and her eyes full of unshed tears reflected in the water, she began to slowly calm. She had remembered a truth her master once told her when she was a little girl. Gazing at the lake, he had said, "The petty man errs not, the gentleman errs always." Petty people would never believe themselves at fault, whereas the noble reflected on themselves to recognize and rectify their faults. She recalled how, at the time, she had argued with her master. Maybe it's because people are too hard on the gentleman, so they amplify a tiny mistake into a huge one. And because a petty man is petty, people don't really blame them when they mess up. How unfair. It's awful to be a gentleman. Lucky that I'm a girl. Jinyangzi had glared at her, his beard bristling. "Unteachable child, your Shishang is much better than you." Of course, her Shishang was better. In her heart, her Shishang was better than anyone. She cupped water from the lake and washed her face, then smiled. She felt that Luo Mingchen, who would admit his wrongs, was more worthy of admiration than anyone who didn't. The evening breeze calmed her mind. As she sat at the bank, she thought back to the two men at the public trial, scrutinizing her memory of every movement, every word, and every expression. She also considered Luo Mingchen's recent haggardness and weight loss. Finally, she came to a decision. He Yin stood up and clenched her fist, a lofty feeling surging in her chest. She declared, "Shishang, it's my turn to help you. Don't you worry." The 5th day of the 4th month was an auspicious day on the calendar. It was suitable for travel, for funerals, for weddings, for breaking ground. Essentially, it was suitable for everything. Duan Chongshen had checked the calendar before deciding on their departure date. Liu Qishuang and Jin Yu sent their two shidi out of Xihua Peak. When it came time to say goodbye, the pair found they had nothing left to say. Yin Biyue had noticed Jin Yu's aura could no longer be so easily restrained. Just standing close to him felt like standing in the shadow of a massive mountain. It was a good thing. Maybe by the time Yin Biyue returned, his elder Shishang would have attained great ascension. After bidding farewell with a bow, Yin Biyue and Duan Chongshen descended the mountain, only to encounter Luo Mingchen waiting for them halfway. He seemed in better health than when they last saw him. "Yin Shidi, Duan Shidi," he said with a slight nod. "A long journey is ahead of us, Luo Shixiang will be in your care," Duan Chongshen said. He grinned. It seemed he didn't hold too much animosity toward Luo Mingchen. Yin Biyue relaxed and nodded back, returning the courtesy. "Luo Shixiang." Thus, the three descended the mountain together. Dawn had just broken, and a faint shadow of the moon still hung in the western sky. The morning bell began to toll from the main peak. Its deep, solemn tone echoed unhurriedly on and on throughout the mountain range, startling flocks of birds from the forest canopy. Although they were still in the mountains, the terrain had leveled considerably, and the main avenue they walked down was even and wide enough to allow two carriages to travel side by side. As the three came near the administrative hall, They could hear voices. Many disciples were awake by now, and some were gathered there. At the sight of the three approaching, the disciples cast discerning glances their way. This was a tranquil, peaceful morning like thousands of mornings before in the Cangya Mountains. All appeared to be the same. Nevertheless, Yin Biyue sensed something amiss. These disciples were all holding swords. Usually, when idle, cultivators hung their light swords at their waists and carried their heavy swords on their backs. Some also utilized spatial magic or spiritual devices to store their gear. Very rarely would they hold their blades in their hands unless they planned on using them immediately. Chapter 15. More and more disciples emerged, flooding the area from every direction. Each one of them had a sword in hand. Yin Biyue stole a glimpse at the two beside him and noticed the pair was walking steadily and acting as if they didn't see the growing crowd. In fact, Duan Chongshen seemed a little excited. By the time they were 10 feet away from the administrative hall, throngs of Cangya's disciples had gathered. They parted to either side of the avenue as the three approached, opening a path for them to pass. Every one of them stared at the departing three fervently, but no one spoke. The air was so quiet that even a breath sounded loud. Yin Biyue felt his stomach drop. He adjusted his pace to one best suited for drawing his sword and started doing test runs in his head for more than 3 ways to break through the encirclement. But his calculated chance of success was only 50%. There were too many people around. Besides, he couldn't tell if there were any master cultivators withholding their qi hidden within the throng. Just then, someone brandished a sword and shouted, "Yin Shishu, the flower plucking tournament victory is yours!" The sudden cry made Yin Biyue jolt. He looked to where it had come from, and wasn't it the kid who'd escorted him from the dungeon the other day? The one who got aggroed because of the halo? Yin Biyue was struck speechless. He didn't have the time to dwell further, however, because more shouts arose from the crowd, the undulating cheers gushing forth like the tide. Luo Shishu seized the championship at Mount Changming. Yin Shixiang will win every battle. Luo Shixiang is invincible. Yin Shixiang #1 in the art of the sword. The disciples gathered on either side of the road to call out to them with varying titles that depended on their seniority. But one thing was uniform: how they raised their swords and waved them back and forth. From afar, the fanfare looked like a flowing sea of blades. Duan Chongshen sighed happily. "This is my first time getting the sword-waving send-off treatment." Yin Biyue couldn't help but feel like he was missing something important. His feeling was correct. Yin Shishu is a good person. If you ever met him, you'd never believe the rumors. If Cheng Shi had been the only one who said this, nobody would have noticed. But there were 4 disciples who escorted Yin Biyue that day. In the world of rumors, 3 men could form a tiger, and 4 men could melt gold. With enough repetition, any falsehood could become truth. They uniformly believed that there was something unusual between Luo Mingchen and Yin Biyue, but it was not hostility. And the guilty party? That was definitely Luo Mingchen. The disciples of Cangya Mountain were first class in cultivation. Likewise, their ability to spread rumors was first class. For example, it really would be no exaggeration to say Liu Boa's daughter and Zhang Shishu's son fell in love and got together, soon became Liu Shiboa and Zhang Shishu are soulmates. They are getting married at the end of the month, and the wedding officiant is the sect leader. When the rest of the disciples, who'd been endangered in the secret realm, had gathered and dissected the event in detail, they'd realized that, even with the killing array activated, they hadn't been in danger. The attacks had been concentrated on Luo Mingchen alone. But he had chosen to take the punishment for Yin Biyue. It was downright strange. Combining Luo Mingchen's reaction at Qinghe Hall and what Cheng Shi's group had witnessed, the masses produced no less than 10 versions of the untold tales between the chief disciple of Cangya sect and the prodigy of Xihua Peak. However, those who speculated a love-hate relationship, or hate arising from love, were in the minority. This lasted until He Yin appeared near the end of the discussion and wistfully said, "What do we mean when we talk about love anyway?" She clammed up when people tried to ask her what had happened inside Qinghe Hall, but the damage was done. Thus, today's scene. Waving swords in farewell for luck was a Cangya tradition. Organized by the disciples, the procession would walk the departing party from the administrative hall all the way to the sect's entrance gates. Years ago, the martial cultivators had waved a variety of swords, while the spiritual cultivators raised a multitude of spiritual weapons. The image of the sword waving had been so stunning that the tradition gradually became waving swords only. Many of the disciples participating in the send-off had to borrow swords last minute, but that didn't affect their enthusiastic cheers. Their roars shook the entire mountain. After the three had passed about a dozen feet, the hollering crowd had followed after them. Their cheers were chaotic at first, but gradually they unified. Two parties seemed to have reached a consensus. One group would shout, "Luo Shixiang, seize the championship at Mount Changmyang." The other group would follow with, "Yin Shixiang, the flower plucking tournament victory is yours." The wind blew through the woods just then, carrying a delightful fragrance. Yin Biyue lifted his gaze to see a dozen maidens in white skirts appear, their movements light and elegant. Their two leading figures pushed off with their toes and leaped gracefully across the trees in opposite directions, one north and one south, to unfurl two large banners written with beautiful flowing words. The south read, "Radiant as a pearl," the north read, "Flawless as jade." Then Tongshen took out his fan and fanned himself as he flashed a charming smile back at the girls. "My supportive Shijie and Shime have such a creative flair," he said with an appreciative sigh. "They're praising me for my pearl-like appearance and flawless character." Yin Biyue fought back a grimace. "Young man, you're too full of yourself. At the very least, leading lady He Yin Yun is obviously here to support her Luo Shixiang." If he applied his knowledge of showbiz novels, the situation became clear. The avenue was divided into two. The south side was Luo Mingchen's fan club, and the north side was Yin Biyue's. The swords they waved were essentially fans and light sticks. Luo Mingchen's fan club won in terms of numbers. They were an impressive dense crowd that stretched for miles. Even their sword waving was in perfect synchronized rhythm. Yin Biyue's fan base won in terms of quality. Discounting their leaders, the four disciplinary disciples, there were also the loyal fans of the sword sage in Jin Yu. This was Xihua Peak's first time participating in the flower plucking tournament, and it represented the sword sage's reputation. Although they were fewer in number, their cultivation was strong, and their shouts were invigorated with the vital qi that brimmed from their cores. The cheers from both sides were evenly matched. It was unfortunate that Yin Biyue's roles in his past showbiz worlds maxed out at 3.5 lines, so he couldn't comprehend this energy. Otherwise, he could have raised his arms and hollered back, "Friends in the back, raise your swords, let me see your hands." Standing on the tree branch, holding one of the giant banners, He Yin Yun smiled as she watched her sisterhood mix in with the two groups and distribute handkerchiefs embroidered with the phrases "Radiant as a pearl" and "Flawless as jade." Over on the tree across, Ren Xiaolian arched her eyebrows at He Yin Yun. "Will this work?" He Yin Yun nodded assertively. Absolutely. He Yin Yun had led her sisters in crafting the embroidered handkerchiefs overnight. They insisted on using the finest materials and the finest needlework so that the handkerchiefs were irresistible once they were in the receiver's hands. On the Sangya Mountains, it was a point of pride to own a maiden's embroidered handkerchief. It didn't take long before the handkerchiefs were all handed out. He Yin Yun broke into a satisfied smile and shot a grateful look at Ren Xiaolian. "Thank you all." Ren Xiaolian responded with a glare. "Don't be so polite." Thus, He Yin Yun didn't say anything more. Not that she had said anything aloud in the first place. They had grown up together. With a single look or subtle expression, they could understand each other perfectly. As He Yin Yun put it, theirs was a ride-or-die friendship, one forged through the life and death situation of having once snuck down the mountain to feast on roasted chicken, been caught and punished with strikes to the palm. Every time the sisterhood of Sangya was caught, He Yin Yun had been the one to step forward to take the blame, earning her the nickname the Scapegoat Supergirl that had lasted until the age of 13. Later, as everyone grew older, they outgrew their gluttonous, mischievous ways and focused on their cultivation. It had been a long time since they last got together, so when He Yin Yun brought forward her spousal plan, her friends had answered as if they'd been injected with adrenaline. Yin Biyue didn't know any of this. Holding the handkerchief forcibly stuffed into his hand, he only felt that something weird had been mixed in with the already chaotic send-off. The procession quieted when they reached the colossal entrance gates. The three turned around and saluted the send-off party. "Thank you for your farewell," Luo Ming-chen said. Then, amid the cheers that erupted once more, the young men headed south, their robes flapping in the wind. Behind them were the first rays of sun, the majestic green mountains, and the roaring sea of swords and voices. Before them was the thorny, muddied path of the unknown. Chapter 16. A cultivator could travel in many ways. Those in the state of second sage and above could ride the wind to cross 10,000 miles in a day or travel through space and time. Aside from those methods, anyone who had entered the doors of cultivation, regardless of level, could expend their own vital qi to increase their travel speed. They could also deploy a spiritual device or ride a mythical beast. However, since the world had entered the age of spiritual decline, spiritual devices for travel were hard to come by, and mythical beasts were rarer still. This was because the living conditions of mythical beasts were demanding. Not only did they require terrain with favorable spiritual energy, they also needed to recognize a master. It was said that the emperor of the northern continent, one of the 6 second sages, kept 4 cyan-winged Yuan birds to pull his royal carriage. Each year, their upkeep consumed 800,000 spirit stones and 60,000 caddies of red tourmaline fruits. Very few in the world could afford something like this. For the group of 3, with their current cultivation level, they could travel 1,000 miles a day if they drove their vital qi to the max. But as Duan Chongshen pointed out, it's rare for us to descend the mountain. Why rush when there is ample time? Besides, Da Shixiang said we should enjoy our travels. Yin Biyue wanted to learn more about this world, so he wasn't opposed. Even with the countless tomes and records piled in his memories, none of it could compare to real-life experiences. When Luo Ming-chen saw him nod, he nodded as well. Once they left the boundaries of the Zangya Mountains, they would pass through Jin City and Guāng City, across Panlong Ridge, then take the 4th official road of the western continent southward to the coast. There, they would board a ferry across the floating sea and ultimately reach Ye City of the southern continent to join the Zangya team before they headed to Mount Changmyang for the tournament together. This was the route they had planned. More precisely, one that Liu Qishuang had planned after much consideration. It was a path with adequate difficulty, not smooth and peaceful, but not as dangerous as traversing the mighty mountains either. In the bustling Jin City, they listened to the storytellers at tea houses tell outrageously exaggerated tales of the flower-plucking tournament. When they reached Yang City, they changed out of their Taoist robes and into common clothes. As they spurred their white horses and traveled on, they looked like 3 young gentlemen who had left home on a journey to pursue knowledge. What surprised Yin Biyue was how amiable the chatterbox and Luo Ming-chen got along. Because Yin Biyue himself didn't talk very much, the other 2 ended up conversing with each other more. It looked like a gentleman's friendship of courtesy and polite smiles. Those who didn't know would think Luo Ming-chen was Duan Chongshen's close friend, rather than an enemy he targeted at Xihua Peak. The whole time, Yin Biyue thought Duan Chongshen had succumbed to the protagonist's aura until the day they arrived at Panlong Ridge, and Duan Chongshen decided to change to a new set of clothes. Yin Biyue had been uncomfortable with the many stares he'd received for his white hair, so after some thought, he draped a hooded obsidian cloak over himself. Now he was quite pleased with his own image. With the hood on, only his sharp chin remained visible. Plus 10 points to broodiness. When Duan Chongshen emerged from the lodge, Yin Biyue thought he would go blind. Duan Chongshen's ridiculously extravagant outfit had obviously been in his luggage the whole time, because it was clearly not sold anywhere in Yang City. He was dressed in a cross-collar long robe covered in gold-embroidered flying Luan birds. His hair was drawn up with a rose gold crown studded with pearls, and around his waist was a white jade belt gilded with dragons, fastened by a cloisonne buckle inlaid with coral. This bedazzling display of jewelry and finery was blinding. From afar, he looked like a walking gold statue. If he had exuded a natural noble air before, this new setup screamed nouveau riche wastrel, the rich and stupid sort. Yin Biyue speculated that something must have triggered this change in Duan Chatterbox, but the man himself was grinning from ear to ear, so Yin Biyue couldn't really comment on it. When Lua Mingchen emerged, he seemed a little taken aback, stricken just as Yin Biyue had been by the dazzling attire. He whipped his head to the side and cleared his throat after a brief pause. Let's go. Yin Biyue could almost see the words, "I can't bear to look," written on his face. The ridge was dense with foliage that canopied the sky, blocking the sun, and the refreshing breeze that swept through the mountain carried the thick scent of grass and earth. Without a word, the three walked the rugged, winding trail for a long time until the sun sank in the west. Yin Biyue wondered. Panlong Ridge wasn't known to harbor any terrible beasts, but was it really okay for Zuan Chongxuan to wear a sitting duck outfit that reflected the light for miles? Sure enough, speak of the devil and he appears. Yin Biyue sensed a disturbance and stopped in his tracks. Lua Mingchuan halted as well. A moment later, there was a rustling in the woods that was creeping towards them. The hostile newcomers did not come in peace. They didn't even try to hide their tracks. "Stop right there!" With a loud bark, a dozen large men jumped out from among the dense trees. The leader of the group was a 6-foot-tall man with a scar down his cheek, holding a 1,000-pound axe. "Where ya from? Know the rules? You pass by our home turf, you gotta pay. Gold or spirit stones, don't matter, you leave 'em all." His lackeys hollered behind him in agreement. "Leave your life if you ain't got money." Then they broke out in riotous laughter. Since the leader of the brigands had started his speech, Yin Biyue had been reciting the lines in his head, not a single word amiss. What a familiar scene. Once upon a time, he'd have been the lackey holding an iron pole. Wait, no, he hadn't been important enough to hold one. He would have been the little guy standing behind the iron pole holding Shamata, lackey who was wearing ribbed jeans and whose bangs were longer than his face. At the leader's taunt, "Hey little girlie, wanna come play with Gaga?" he would silently leer along. Following the protagonist's shout of "Stop!" he would have been sent flying with a kick as the gang leader cried, "Get him!" The memory filled Yin Biyue with contempt for the brigands before them. These guys were totally unprofessional. Just look at the guy in the back. His expression was all wrong. He was distracted. 1-star rating. Maybe they were so lackluster because he was in the protagonist's group this time and the script had changed. Yin Biyue counted to 3 but didn't hear the familiar cry of "Stop!" Instead, he heard chuckling. Then, Chongxuan was the source, and no wonder. Of all the people to mug, the bandits had chosen them, participants of the flower-plucking tournament, the chief disciple of Zangya, and the sword sage's pupils. If word got out about this incident, the cultivation world would laugh for a year straight. Yin Biyue glanced at their outfits. The 3 of them looked like 2 servants accompanying their prolific master out on a little jaunt. He couldn't blame the bandits for not knowing whom they faced. Lua Mingchen was neither angry nor indignant. In fact, he looked like he planned to reason with the brigands. Before he could speak, however, Duan Chongxuan beat him to it. Duan Chongxuan flipped his fan. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked the brigand leader. The brigand leader froze. Duan Chongxuan unapologetically took a step to stand behind Luo Mingchen. "This man is the chief disciple of the Zangya Mountains himself, the next sect leader, Luo Mingchen," he proclaimed. Then he turned his nose up at the brigands in utter scorn. "Kneel at once and call him daddy." "Bullshit," the leader blew up immediately. "If that's the chief disciple, I'm the old emperor of the northern continent." Duan Changxuan's expression grew oddly impassive. "No, you're not." His response went unheard as the muggers lunged at them, but before they could get close, they rebounded against an invisible vital qi barrier and went flying high in the air. The leader crashed particularly hard, having broken 2 whole trees in the process. Luo Mingchen hadn't moved a single finger. Lying sprawled on the ground as he puked blood, the groaning brigand leader couldn't understand how his years of robbery experience had failed him. How had this fat sheep of a target turned into an iron wall? The leader was technically a cultivator, having attained the marrow purification state, and a few of the lackeys were in the qi cultivation state, although none of them had the potential to progress further than that. Such a group of brigands on Panlong Ridge was more than enough to rob merchant caravans or travelers who couldn't afford a security escort. Panlong Ridge was devoid of spiritual energy and lacked in natural resources, so cultivators rarely came to this place. Without a doubt, they had been lured out by Zuan Chongshuan, the walking gold statue. The brigand leader had gone from lifting his foot to lying flat on the ground in less than 10 seconds. "Let's go," Luo Mingchen said to his two companions. The three stepped past the weak, pained cries of mercy to continue on their way. And the above scenario repeated again and again. They encountered similar groups of bandits about every 10 miles. Even after the sun had set, there were groups who came for them holding torches. Yin Biyue was slowly coming to understand what Duan Chongshuan was doing. But if the goal was to cause trouble and inconvenience for Luo Mingchen, this method was too low level. What was he really trying to accomplish? It couldn't possibly have been to do heaven's work and purge the mountains of brigands. Finally, once it was truly dark, peace came at last. The dappled glow of the cool moon spilled through thick foliage, chilling the late spring evening wind. The three found a secluded cave in the woods to rest overnight, and after Zuan Chongshuan burned away the cobwebs, the withered branches, and weeds with a fire talisman, they settled inside. Luo Mingchen and Yin Biyue sat and prepared to meditate while Duan Chongshuan continued to make the space comfortable. He took out a luminous pearl and embedded it on the cave wall. A soft glow illuminated the cavity. Next, he hauled out a large carved rosewood bed canopy with silk tulle drapes. "Sister Xiang, I also prepared a bed. Do you want to lie down?" he asked. Yin Biyue thought he had grown accustomed to Duan Chongshuan's oddities, but this was the oddest thing yet. He couldn't stop the corner of his mouth from twitching. "No thanks." "Aw, okay," the chatterbox mumbled before climbing in alone. As the moon traveled westward in the night sky, its oblique light filtered into the cave and mingled with the resplendence of the luminous pearl. The cries of insects and the wind rustling through the mountainous forests were the only sounds that interrupted the quiet. Because the cave wasn't big, Yin Biyue and Luo Mingchen were only a few feet apart. In the cultivation world, this was an offensive distance. If they were strangers, 3 feet was a sign of disrespect. If they were enemies, 3 feet was a sign of threat. Yin Biyue was a little uncomfortable. He couldn't tell if the unease was a residual reaction from his body or if it was his internal guard. A cultivator's senses were particularly keen after reaching the spirit concentration state. Even without deliberate effort, he could sense the breathing of the one beside him. On this cool night, he could also sense his warmth. These sensations only amplified as time pushed on and the night deepened. He wondered if the well-mannered Luo Mingchen felt the same discomfort, or if the latter had already immersed himself in meditation, reaching the zone where he was ready to use spirit stones to begin cultivation. As a spiritual cultivator, he should have spirit stones on him. Contrary to what Yin Biyue imagined, Luo Mingchen was reminiscing. He felt the atmosphere familiar, as if he'd been transported back to the Hall of Night Study at Lanyuan Academy. An aloof and taciturn boy was studying at a desk as the gentle yellow glow of the lamps illuminated his profile, softening his edges with an illusion of tenderness. Where was Luo Mingchen? He was sitting beside the boy, his desk stacked just as high with books and scrolls, and the lamplight glowing bright. When he grew tired from studying, he would watch the boy. Though he was youthful, he was good-looking, and to stare at him was to feel rejuvenated. Because he was so absorbed in his books, he never noticed Luo Mingchen's subtle glances. The Hall of Night Study and the library were connected by a mid-air suspended corridor. Students would come to the hall to study overnight when they needed to finish perusing books that couldn't leave the premises. Luo Mingchen didn't often frequent this hall, but every time he did, he saw the boy sitting in the same spot under the west window. Sometimes he couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of him. Many times he had wanted to tell him, "Shiji, you're still so young. You won't grow tall if you pull so many all-nighters." He never did, though. He seemed to recall the boy didn't like being reminded of his age. Deep in the night, when the students who studied here grew tired, they would whisper with their neighbors. It helped to refresh the mind, and sometimes to make a friend. However, over the countless times Luo Mingchen sat beside the boy, they did not talk. The boy never showed fatigue or any desire to speak. Luo Mingchen didn't want to bother him. Until one time, the boy looked up to stare at his own desk lamp with a small frown. The academy was a humble institution that didn't use oil lamps. When the lamp's candles burned for too long, the wicks would spit and their flames would dim. Sensing the boy's movement, Luo Mingchen looked at him and chuckled. Shidi, he asked in a low voice, have you forgotten to bring your wick cutter? The boy tilted his head, his clear black eyes reflecting the warm yellow candlelight. Yes. Luo Mingchen rose to his feet and leaned over to help him trim the wick, his long hair cascading over his shoulder. He was close enough that he could see the shadow cast by the boy's long eyelashes. The shadows cast upon the west window seemed to have blended together. Moments later, brightness returned to the table, and Luo Mingchen retreated to a polite distance. The boy nodded. Thanks. You're welcome, Shidi, Luo Mingchen said, setting the wick cutter down before he introduced himself. I'm Luo Mingchen from Guāng Prefecture of the Eastern Continent. I'm Yin Biyue from Ying'an City of the Central Continent. These words were the first to pass between them, and the few they exchanged in the 3 years they had spent at the academy. At that moment, in the dimly lit hall of night study, where shadows danced and intertwined, where thick, dusty old tombs lay silently, where aged, mottled lamps flickered as their wicks sparked, time stopped. Yin Biyue thought Luo Mingchen had to be deeply uncomfortable as well, since his breathing was unsteady. Thankfully, the day was breaking and the sky lightening by then. Yin Biyue picked up his sword and stepped out of the cave. The morning breeze greeted him, sweeping away the confusion of the night. Dawn had come, the perfect time of the day to practice the sword. Chapter 17. Yin Biyue's sword was named Yihu and had been given to him by his discount bin master via Jinyu. During his past 3 years in the Zangya Mountains, he had practiced the cold water blade 1,000,000 times. It was so ingrained in him that it was now second nature. Nonetheless, after his trip to Lanyuan Academy, it was no longer the same cold water blade he'd once practiced. Yin Biyue sheathed his sword just as dawn broke. A tree the size of 2 men standing together toppled next to him with a thunderous rumble. In the next breath, every tree in 100-foot radius fell, startling flocks of birds out of the woods. Standing in the center of a field of snapped trunks and branches, encircled by lingering sword qi, he glanced around nervously. I haven't seen you practice in ages, Shēng, Duan, Chatterbox hooted. I see you've improved. Congrats. Beside Duan, Chongshen was Luo Mingchen, who smiled and inclined his head. Yin Biyue relaxed. If Luo Mingchen couldn't detect anything unusual, his method proved that no one in or below the breakthrough state would notice anything amiss. Moreover, given that Luo Mingchen practiced the Gara pupil technique, his eyesight should be sharper than most. Perhaps Yin Biyue could raise the standard. It seemed that he would have no trouble avoiding suspicion from his opponents at Mount Chongyang. He couldn't inject his vital qi into his sword, but the trip to the academy had given him an idea to work around this predicament. To wrap the surface of the sword with his vital qi. The method had to have been tried before, but there was more to it than that, because the vital qi dispersed quickly and required a tremendous amount of output. Given his current ability, if that was all he did, he wouldn't last longer than a cup of tea. However, his soul was strong. Using that strength, he could condense his consciousness. That force then locked the vital qi over the sword's surface. The drawback of this method was that the stronger the opponent, the faster his mental strength drained. Fortunately, with a power-leveled soul condensed over multiple transmigrations, he recovered quickly. One night would suffice at his current cultivation level. Yin Biyue had already made up his mind that this was the best way to deal with his sword situation. As soon as the flower-plucking tournament was over, he would return to Zangya and examine the issue further in seclusion. It was a great taboo for a sword cultivator to swap swords halfway through their cultivation, but if Yihu failed to work for him, he'd have no choice. Yin Biyue turned around and nodded at the other two. Let's go. Duan, Chatterbox, happily caught up to him. Today's grand orthodox cultivation drama, premiering on New Year's Day, was once again replaced by a slice-of-life sitcom. By the third time they were mugged, Luo Mingchen struck before Duan Chongshen could step forward to tell the bandits to kneel and call him daddy. Yin Biyue noted Luo Mingchen's impeccable control, no matter how outrageous the other party's behavior or how foul their language. Luo Mingchen remained unruffled. He never seriously harmed anyone. If his heart was as steady as he appeared, he had terrifying self-control. Duan Chongshen probably wanted to test Luo Mingchen, or rather, to see his true colors. What would Luo Mingchen do when facing the most vulgar insults from a pissant opponent? The answer was, Luo Mingchen did what every do-gooder would have done, every time. Bright spring blossoms had wilted into the lush greens of summer. The soft earth beneath their feet and the dancing, dappling light of the foliage uplifted the mood. Just when Yin Biyue thought things would continue this way forever, an unexpected twist opened the door to a new world. This time, Luo Mingchen killed. Vibrant red blood gushed from the dead man's neck and soaked the brown earth. The head lay severed from the body, face frozen in wide-eyed terror. Yin Biyue was rooted where he stood. It took a moment before he realized what had just happened. Could the tolerant Luo Mingchen really act so decisively? This group wasn't entirely composed of brigands. Rather, it included casual martial artists and cultivators in their qi cultivation state. They roamed Panlong Ridge, leaving lone travelers alone and waiting for the right opportunities to strike at poorly secured merchant caravans. Luo Mingchen had wanted to reason with them at first, but Duan Chongshen had beaten him to the punch with his kneel and call him daddy shtick. Predictably, the muggers' foul language surged forth like the tide. Unpredictably, their target wasn't the one who initiated the verbal attack, nor Luo Mingchen, who'd been placed on a pedestal. Bullshit. What, Sanya sect? Look at that guy in the back, hiding his face like a woman. He's obviously ashamed, huh? Before Yin Biyue noticed he was catching strays, the jeering laughter halted. Luo Mingchen had made his move. The aura he usually withheld exploded out of him, the invisible pressure rippling the air. He only killed one man, but the rest were severely injured. Yin Biyue unconsciously took a step back. Luo Mingchen snapped out of it. Had he scared Yin Biyue? It made sense. His shidi had never witnessed such violence before. The anger in his heart dissipated as he held Yin Biyue's gaze. Yin shidi. You entered the academy at a young age and haven't experienced much of the world, so it's natural that you wouldn't understand how treacherous it can be, Luo Mingchen said, his voice soft. As cultivators walk this world, we cannot allow others to insult us without cause. There will be times when we must draw our swords. He couldn't tell if he was justifying his action to Yin Biyue or himself. Besides, they are villains. If I don't harm them today, they will harm another tomorrow. Yin Biyue was dumbfounded. Had he really just been lectured on morals by a goody two-shoes? Where did that leave him, the villain? In spite of himself, his face fell. Ding! The villain expression's sharp glare appeared. Conditions met. The halo is now activated. Yin Biyue no longer had any hopes for the halo's effect. In fact, he would give it a negative review and the worst rating. The seller was a scammer. No one was frightened to tears by just a glare. Luo Mingchen felt slightly helpless, no, frustrated, at his loss of self-control. Yin Biyue was frozen in place, looking distraught. His heart was as kind and soft as Luo Mingchen had thought. Just as well, with him around, shidi would be protected. If Yin Biyue didn't like to witness the loss of a life, Luo Mingchen would avoid letting him see the kill next time. Luo Mingchen had just made up his mind when he saw Yin Biyue continue on his way. Duan Chongshen hurried after him, not daring to let Duan Chongshen walk in front again. Luo Mingchen dropped a quick, "I will scout ahead," and gathered his vital qi, darting out of sight. Yin Biyue was still ranting about the scammy seller in his head when he heard Duan Chongshen address him. Shixiang, are you angry? Huh? Yin Biyue didn't know what he meant. Shixiang, please don't be angry. I know I was wrong. Duan Chongshen's tone was careful. I'll go back to my old outfit tomorrow. Yin Biyue continued not to know what he meant. What happened to the masses have sharp eyes? Which one of your eyes saw that I'm angry over Luo Mingchuan killing some guy? I wasn't angry, Yin Biyue said. This concerned the dignity of a villain, so he felt compelled to explain himself. Then, Changshen was deeply moved that his Shixiang forgave him despite his flippant behavior. Shixiang, what do you think crosses the line for Luo Mingchuan? Yin Biyue still didn't know what the hell he was saying. How had the subject changed so fast? He had no clue what the answer would be. If he'd been asked last night, he would have said there was no limit to the bleeding-heartedness of a bleeding heart. Luo Mingchuan had kept himself so firmly in check during the previous encounters, there'd been no reason for him to suddenly go off. The chatterbox's voice drifted on the wind, but Yin Biyue still managed to catch his next words clearly. Luo Mingchuan's limit is you. Excuse me? Say that again? Yin Biyue was so shocked that he didn't catch the rest of Duan Changshen's relieved mumble. If that's the case, maybe I'll consider handing you over to him. Shijian might also consider it. Still, let's observe him for a while longer and see how he performs. Do not be presumptuous, Yin Biyue heard his own stiff voice say. Duan Changshen clamped his mouth shut. Yin Biyue had no time to dwell on the subject because he spotted Luo Mingchuan's back ahead of them. Then his eyes were captured by the sight of the group of a dozen people standing in front of Luo Mingchuan. They were dressed in Cyan Taoist robes with wooden crowns fastened on their hair, and their expressions were icy. Obviously, this group had blocked Luo Mingchuan's way, or it might have been a chance encounter between rivals rather than a deliberate obstruction. Regardless of the relationship, the mountain path was narrow, and someone had to yield. Yin Biyue approached and recognized the 8 trigrams array on the robes, Bao Pu set. He knew then that this was no longer a matter of yielding. That's all for this time. Join me again next time. Thanks for watching.